Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om Parameshwaram. Om. Good. Would you run up to my room? I left my notes. Please get that. And I think by the window. Thank you. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Nice to see you all for our ongoing Bhagavad Gita class. We continue our study of Chapter 12. Welcome also to all of our friends who are watching online. We'll begin, as always, with some recitation. We'll begin with verse 8. And as always, while I'm chanting, be sure to read the translation and then repeat after me. Mayeva manaha dhatsva, Mayeva manaha dhatsva, Mayi buddhim niveshaya, Mayi buddhim niveshaya, Nivasishyasi Mayeva, Nivasishyasi Mayeva, Atahurdvam na samshayaha, Atahurdvam na samshayaha, Atha chittam samadhatum, Atha chittam samadhatum, Na shaknoshi mayi sthiram, Na shaknoshi mayi sthiram, Abhyasa yogena tato, Abhyasa yogena tato, Mamichhaptum dhananjaya, Mamichhaptum dhananjaya, Abhyase pyasamartosi, Abhyase apsamartosi, Matkarma paramo bhava, Matkarma paramo bhava, Mararthamapi karmani, Mararthamapi karmani, Kurvan siddhyam avapsyasi, Kurvan siddhyam avapsyasi, Athaitadapya shaktosi, Athaitadapya shaktosi, Kartum madyoga mashitaha, Kartum madyoga mashitaha, Sarva karma palatyagam, Sarva karma palatyagam, Tata kuruyatatmavan, Tata kuruyatatmavan, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasad, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasad, Jnanadhyanam vishishyate, Jnanadhyanam vishishyate, Dhyanat karma palatyagas, Dhyanat karma palatyagas, Tyagachantiranantaram, Tyagachantiranantaram, Adveshta sarvabhutanam, Adveshta sarvabhutanam, Maitra karuna heva cha, maitra karuna heva cha, nirmamo nirahankaraha, nirmamo nirahankaraha, samaduhka sukhakshami, samaduhka sukhakshami. Good. We will stop there and pick up the thread. Actually, I'm going to go back to verse, in the introduction, I'll go back to verse 8. Before, I want to remind you of the last topic. We want to review the last topic that we saw in the last class. But before that, I've got my notes back. I can see what I had planned to do. And what I'd like to do is first to review this series of verses that we saw at the end of the last class, because it shows two things that are quite remarkable. The two things, just to give you the heads up, the two things is this is not a one-size-fits-all approach to spirituality, but this is an approach which recognizes individual differences and prescribes different practices for different people. We talked about that at length, the principle called adhikari bheda, we discussed in our prior class. And the other thing is you'll see that Sri Krishna comes back to karma yoga one more time. Even here, by the way, more in chapter 18, he's going to do it again. So it's not that he's even done talking about karma yoga, but you'll see the importance and centrality of karma yoga in these teachings. So what we saw at the end of our last class is a sequence of verses, beginning with verse 8, where Sri Krishna says you should fix your mind on me. But what's now interesting is in the next verse he says, Atta, but now, if you're not able to fix your mind on me, then what? Abhyasa. You should practice. Continue to try. Make repeated effort. You have to follow me in the slide. So we're now in verse 9. So, Atta chittam samadhatum. Yes. So, if you're not able to fix your mind on me in meditation, then keep practicing. Meditation is a learned skill. But then, it gets even more surprising, abhyase api asamartaha asi. Suppose you're not able to do that. You're not able to sit for formal seated meditation and practice. Then what? If that meditation is not for you, then get up. And he says, mat karma paramo bhava. Dedicate yourself to some mat karma, a religious activity focused on Ishvara, on Sri Krishna. Activities like bhajans, listening to music, kirtan, chanting, any of these activities. Some religious activity, puja, going to the temple. So be engaged in some activity. If you can't engage in formal seated meditation, then get up. Go to the temple, go to some bhajan session, be engaged in other religious activities. Then, surprisingly, it says, suppose you can't even do that. I joked with you in your last class. I said, suppose you are allergic, so to speak, to these religious activities. Sri Krishna says, if he spoke Hindi, ye bhi theek hai. He says that's also okay. If you're allergic to these other activities, he gives one final option. He says, mad yogam ashrataha. You should resort then to my own special technique. And what is that special technique? This is verse 11. And that special technique is what? Sarva karma palatyagam. The tyaga, the renunciation of sarva karma pala, the fruits of all actions. This is where he comes back to karma yoga. Recognizing that you are the agent of action and the results of your actions come from the hands of Ishvara, so to speak. For every action you do, You receive the results of your actions from Ishvara. It's like at the altar when you receive prasad. The prasad is coming from Ishvara. That's why they call it prasada buddhi, the attitude of prasada, the attitude of looking upon whatever unfolds in your life comes from Ishvara, prasada buddhi. So this is a series of verses we saw in the last class, and before we, very significant, as I said, for the two reasons. One is it's not one size fits all by any means. Secondly, Sri Krishna comes back one more time to Karma Yoga. Now, with regard to Karma Yoga, before we continue with today's class, a good question came. And the questioner says, I am unable to keep Ishvara in my mind through the day in all my activities. Whenever I am doing some work, I am either engrossed in a job at hand or my mind starts wandering, as we talked about in our meditation session. What is the best way to keep the focus on Ishvara while still performing tasks? Very good question. And has to do with a slight misunderstanding about Karma Yoga. Clearly, it's a question about Karma Yoga, how to keep your mind fixed on Ishvara while engaged in activities, how to constantly have that prasada buddhi. Karma Yoga is not meditation. And consider this, meditation, the widest definition of meditation is fixing your mind on something. That would be a good definition, general definition of meditation. Meditation is to fix your mind on something. He speaks of fixing his mind on Ishvara while engaged in various activities. What he's describing is a kind of meditation, right? That's a kind of meditation. To keep your mind fixed on Ishvara throughout the day is a form of meditation because you're controlling your mind, you're fixing your mind on an object. Alambana, they use in yoga terminology. To fix your mind on an object of meditation is meditation. If your object of meditation is Ishvara, to fix your mind on Ishvara throughout the day is actually a meditative, or maybe we'll call it a contemplative activity. Meditation is usually associated with sitting down and closing your eyes. So instead of calling it meditative, we'll call it contemplative. But that's not Karma Yoga. So there's a subtle point, and I don't know that we've ever discussed this before, which is why I took up this particular question. Karma Yoga is not about controlling your mind. Karma Yoga is a matter of shifting your perspective. Meditation and contemplation are based on controlling your mind. Karma Yoga is based on knowledge, in particular, knowledge of Ishvara as karma, phala, data. Knowledge of Ishvara as the giver of the fruits of all your actions. Whatever you do, you receive the results from Ishvara. That's a matter of knowledge. It's not a matter of controlling your mind. It's a matter of knowledge, and I would go further, though, and say it's a matter of shifting your perspective, or even further, shifting your world view. Generally, our world view is that we are the masters of our own destiny. We are controlling the rudder of the ship that flows through that directs the course of our lives. And here the shift is to understand that at best you control your actions, you choose your deeds, but you have no control whatsoever over the outcome of those deeds. This is the shift of attitude, shift of perspective, shift of worldview. To recognize that for whatever deeds you engage in, you have no control whatsoever over the outcome. The outcome is entirely in Ishvara's hands. Of course, if you don't do any action, you won't get any results at all. So you can't distort this teaching to support some kind of inactivity. Someone might argue, well, if I can't guarantee the results, why should I even try? You get the point. That's a silly argument when you think about it. But what we're describing now is the fact that karma yoga is not controlling your mind to keep your mind focused on Ishvara all day long. Karma yoga, is a shift of worldview where you no longer see yourself as being in command of the outcome of your deeds. You see yourself as being in command of the deeds, but recognizing that Ishvara is in control, so to speak, over the outcome of your deeds. It's knowledge, it's a shift of attitude, it's a shift of world view. And since and I want to contrast that with a meditative or contemplative activity of fixing your mind. Fixing your mind on Ishvara is a form of meditation or contemplation. It's not karma yoga. Karma yoga is being engaged in action with this shifted perspective where you engage in some action, and while you're doing it, you recognize that the outcome is not in your hands, the outcome of your deeds is in Ishvara's hands. That's karma yoga. So notice, karma yoga is not to fix your mind on Ishvara. That's a meditative or contemplative activity. Karma yoga is this shift of worldview, shift of perspective. And since it's a shift of perspective, it's not like you have to constantly remind yourself of it. Although, actually, let me set that aside. There are helpful forms of remembrance. Let me set that aside. Maybe the better point to be made here is this, and that is knowledge. To know that Ishvara is the karma paladata, whether you remember it or not, that knowledge is always available to you. You know that 2 + 2 is 4. Do you have to think about it all day long? 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, 2. You don't need to do that all day long. When you need that knowledge, it's available. You don't have to you don't have to meditate on 2 + 2 is 4. When you need that knowledge, it's available. So in karma yoga, you don't need to fix your mind on Ishvara all the time. When you are engaged in any activity, you will know if karma yoga has really gone in. When you do any deed, you will simultaneously recognize that the outcome of the deed is not in your hands. The outcome of your deed is in Ishvara's hands. This is karma yoga. So, karma yoga is not fixating your mind on Ishvara. Karma yoga is appreciating Ishvara as karma paladata. Okay, now, that's something very important. I'm glad we got that question. Now, we are ready to proceed in our text with verse 12. Shreyo hi jnana abhyasad, Shreyo hi jnana abhyasad, Jnanadhyanam vishishyate, Jnanadhyanam vishishyate, Dhyanat karma palatyagas, dhyanat karma palatyagas, dhyagat chantiranantaram, dhyagat chantiranantaram. Nice grammar here. Tyagat shantihi. So that word shanti, you recognized it anyway, but notice the change of spelling that takes place. Tyagat becomes tyagach, and shanti becomes chanti. This is all rules of sandhi, grammar rules. Okay, to the top. He says, let's see the verse in brief, and then I'll go to the board because there's some details here we need to understand properly. He says, he indeed, he says, jnanam shreyas. Knowledge is shreyas, best. Best as compared to what? Abhyasat, practice. Knowledge is better than practice. So just get the verse simply, and then we'll explain it. Knowledge is better than practice, but jnanat, better than knowledge, dhyanam vishishyate. Meditation excels as being better than knowledge. But dhyanat, better than meditation, karma pala tyagaha. We just said renunciation of the fruits of one's actions. Why? Tyagat, from that renunciation, shantihi, peace. Anantaram, follows immediately. Now, there's a sequence given in this verse, and to understand the verse, we have to see the sequence. So notice in the sequence, he said that better than practice, abhyasa, better than practice is jnanam, better than jnanam, knowledge, is dhyana, meditation, and better than dhyana, meditation, is karma pala tyaga. So we have this fourfold comparison, and to understand the verse, we need to understand that fourfold comparison. Let me go to the board, and we will see that. So he uses the word abhyasa for practice. Let me make sure, yeah, good. And better than practice is jnanam, which is knowledge. Of course, in Vedanta, this knowledge is not like any other kind of knowledge. This is knowledge of your true self. This is the kind of knowledge that makes you enlightened. So don't think of this as some ordinary kind of knowledge. This is spiritual wisdom. It's actually enlightenment. Now, in order to understand this terminology better, it's helpful to use a commentary. And I'm using this time through the Bhagavad Gita, following the commentary of Madhusudana Saraswati, the very important teacher in Shankaracharya's lineage. And he says very plainly that abhyasa is the practice of shravana. Most of you know that shravana is the Vedantic practice of what we're doing right now. Engagement in spiritual studies. Spiritual studies which are meant to lead you to enlightenment. And shravana because it's a matter of hearing. Shravana literally means hearing. So it refers to the practice of being engaged in spiritual studies for the sake of reaching enlightenment, knowledge. Destruction of ignorance. The veil of ignorance covering your true nature is covered by that so-called veil of ignorance. That veil of ignorance is removed by this knowledge. So first Sri Krishna says, better than abhyasa is jnana. Well, of course, the result is better than the means. Abhyasa is for the sake of jnana. The result is better than the cause. This is what you're after. Abhyasa is the means, and this is the end. So therefore, jnana is better than abhyasa. Then he goes on to say that better than jnana, knowledge, is dhyana, meditation, which Madhusudana explains as nididhyasana. Most of you know the threefold practice of Vedanta is Shravana, Manana, and nididhyasana. So Shravana is engagement in these teachings to gain knowledge. Manana is removing any doubts or vagueness that stand in the way of gaining that clear knowledge. But then having gained that knowledge, there's something missing, which is being firmly established in that knowledge, being completely rooted in that knowledge, having that understanding pervade each and every moment of your life, all of your thinking, without exception. There's a process of assimilation required. So if our process of Shravana leads to the gaining of knowledge, the discovery of your true nature, that discovery needs to be assimilated, needs to be made very firm, and that's done through a particular kind of dhyana, a particular kind of meditation, a kind of meditation called nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is Vedantic contemplation, is how we usually describe it. So he says that better than practice, Shravana, is jnana, which is the fruits of that practice. Better than jnana, discovery of your true nature, is dhyana, because through nididhyasana, through contemplation, you assimilate that knowledge. So better than knowledge is assimilated knowledge. Better than having jnana is jnana nishtha, firm establishment in that knowledge. And then he takes one more step. Better than dhyana is, and I'm going to abbreviate it here, karma pala tyaga, KPT. Karma, I don't know. I'm too lazy to write it all out. So better than knowledge is karma pala tyaga. And at first, that seems to stick out being out of order, because we just saw in a prior verse karma pala tyaga in a sense of karma yoga. By recognizing that you have no control over the karma pala. You have control over karma, you have no control over the pala. So karma pala tyaga in the prior sense is to give up the false notion that you have control over the pala. You have control over the karma, Ishvara has control over the pala. And if that's the interpretation of karma pala tyaga, it's out of order, because karma pala tyaga is preparatory. It belongs way up here. What is it doing way down here? Do you see the point I'm making? Is that karma yoga is preparatory for gaining knowledge. You know that already. Karma yoga is sadhana, spiritual practice, that's done to make you prepared, to make you an adhikari, to gain this knowledge. If you are not prepared, if you are not an adhikari, no matter how much listening and no matter how many classes you attend, no matter how many spiritual texts you read, if you are not prepared, knowledge will never take place. The preparation is crucial, and the preparation includes karma yoga. So if karma pala tyaga is understood in a conventional sense as karma yoga, it's in the wrong place. Obviously, it can't be in the wrong place. Sri Krishna is not going to make a mistake. So here's something tricky. There are two kinds of karma pala tyaga. One is conventional, what we've been discussing, karma yoga. So one kind of karma pala tyaga is karma yoga as we conventionally understand it. So tyaga, renunciation of the pala, meaning giving up thinking that you are in control of the pala. That's one meaning of karma pala tyaga. But there's another meaning, and it's the second meaning that Sri Krishna is referring to here. And karma pala tyaga means, who cares about the pala? Who cares about any results? Who cares about any worldly result whatsoever? Who cares about worldly accomplishments? Who cares about worldly joys? Who cares about happiness? Who cares about anything? When you are fully established in your true nature as Satchit Ananda, you become so full and complete, you need nothing. Enlightenment. And a good word to use here is a state of fulfillment. And the Sanskrit term for that, for those of you who like Sanskrit, krita krityata. I like that word. Krita krityata. It's a condition of having accomplished all that needs to be accomplished. A condition of having accomplished anything and everything that needs to be accomplished. It's like if you had a to-do list for your entire life and having checked out every last item. Done. Bas ho gaya. What do you say? Sab kam ho gaya. Everything is done. That sense of completion, and I think fulfillment is a really nice term here. When you feel a sense of such completion and fulfillment, who cares about karma pala? Right? Who cares? They call this para vairagya. Vairagya, you know, as dispassion. Para vairagya is a particular kind of dispassion that comes to one who's enlightened. And it's a condition in which you literally, who cares? What difference? Who cares is not the right expression. What difference does it make? If this happens or this doesn't happen, what difference does it make? If I get it or I don't get it, makes no difference. It's a condition, that word fulfillment, but think of it in an absolute sense. You are so full and complete, nothing can add to your completeness, nothing can detract from your completeness. Like the ocean. You can't make the ocean level go. Don't tell me about global warming. Those are real things. But setting that aside, ignoring global warming for the time being, the level of the ocean, with all the rivers and glaciers filling the ocean level so far hasn't gone up. And with all the water evaporating from the ocean, with the sun shining on it, the level doesn't go down. Because of the vastness of the ocean, its level doesn't increase, doesn't decrease. That's a great metaphor. When you recognize your own limitlessness, the vastness of your true self, that ananda, without limitation, when that is recognized, you you gain a kind of fulfillment that is absolute and complete, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So now this verse makes more sense. So, abhyasat, better than practice, better than spiritual study, is jnanam, the knowledge which results from this spiritual study. And better than knowledge is dhyana, the form of not meditation in general, but Vedantic contemplation, nididhyasana, which culminates in you being firmly established in that knowledge. And then better than being dhyanat, better than being firmly established in that knowledge, is karma pala tyaga, not in the sense of karma yoga. Karma pala tyaga in the sense of absolute fulfillment. Nothing can add to your fullness, nothing can detract from your fullness. And that's why it says tyagat, from that final state. We can just go back to the board. So tyagat, from that karma pala tyaga, from that absolute fulfillment, Sri Krishna says, shantihi anantaram, peace follows. Along with that sense of absolute fulfillment comes perfect peace. And perfect peace is peace that doesn't come and go. And you all know what it is to experience moments of peace. This is a kind of inner peace that doesn't come and go. This is the result of enlightenment, result of fulfillment. Just one more way to understand this fulfillment, because this is one way of describing enlightenment. In fact, Sri Krishna is going to talk much more about it in the coming verses. Here, and I've many times used this metaphor. In fact, even talking to children, I ask kids, what is the source of happiness? And children will have, either ice cream or a favorite toy or whatever. Okay, so let's use the ice cream another time. Suppose the child says, the source of happiness for me is my stuffed bear. And children like these stuffed animals. So he's got a stuffed bear, which is for this young child. The child considers that stuffed bear to be the source of happiness. Is it in the stuffing? You get the point. The child imagines the stuffed bear to be the source of happiness. We know, as grown adults, that the true source of happiness is not in the bear. The true source is inside here. Not in the bear, in here. But we say, we're so wise as adults, we wouldn't make that same mistake that the child makes. But adults do make that mistake all the time. Only it's not in a simple stuffed toy. Now the source of happiness becomes a holiday in Hawaii, or becomes, how about a new job or a promotion, a new house, a new child in your family, marriage of your grown children. Look at that. You look upon the birth of a child or getting your grown children married, you might consider that to be a source of happiness, those events. Take the child, that's a better, because it's something very concrete. That child, the birth of, especially your first child, the birth of your first child, that child is looked upon as a source of happiness, just like the child looks upon the stuffed bear as a source of happiness. Of course, parents learn very quickly that having children is a mixed blessing. It's a blessing, no doubt, but there are plenty of difficulties involved in raising a family. You know that better than me. The point I'm making is it's so common to make that mistake. That mistake in Sanskrit is called shobhana adhyasa. Adhyasa, superimposition of shobhana, Well, translate it as desirability. Or better yet, source of happiness. So the child superimposes the source of happiness on the stuffed bear. You superimpose the source of happiness on a holiday in Hawaii, birth of a child, or a marriage of your adult children, or a new job, new home, whatever it may be. But it's the same mistake. It's exactly the same mistake. You think that the source of happiness is something external to you when you know very well the truth. The true source of happiness indeed lies within. Here's what happens. The child outgrows the stuffed bear when a child figures out that bear is not really the source of happiness. So when a child is 2, 3, 4 years old, they may think it's a source of happiness, but by the time that child is 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, that stuffed bear is gone because the child has outgrown the stuffed bear. Watch where this goes. The child outgrows, that's an important word. The child outgrows the stuffed bear when it recognizes that the stuffed bear is not the source of happiness, contentment, peace. Suppose you get enlightened. Being enlightened is to outgrow all desires. Just as a child outgrows the stuffed bear, suppose you outgrow, so to speak, the holiday in Hawaii. Suppose you outgrow the idea of a new house. You stop building. Suppose you outgrow the idea of a new job, raise. It's just money. Suppose you outgrow the idea that another child will bring happiness into your life, or that getting your adult children married will bring happiness. Suppose you outgrow any concept, not any. Suppose you outgrow all concepts of worldly happiness through the recognition of your own innate fullness. You get it? The recognition of your own inner perfection, that inner fullness, that with that recognition, you outgrow all worldly dependencies. You no longer look at anything at all in the world as being a source of happiness. This is karma phala tyaga in a second sense. Not in a sense of karma yoga, but in a sense of outgrowing all worldly things and activities, in the sense that you no longer look at any worldly accomplishment as being a source of happiness. And that's only possible when you recognize your innate perfection, that fulfillment, fullness, inner fullness. My guru loved to use that term, that inner fullness, with that recognition. Now, with that verse, we finished the first half of some chapters are very clearly in parts. This chapter really has a clear part 1 and a clear part 2. Part 2 begins with the 13th verse and continues to the end of the chapter. And in part 2, Sri Krishna describes the nature of one who has that fulfillment, the nature of one who is enlightened, who has discovered that inner perfection, that inner fullness. And we've seen this topic before. Remember back in chapter 2, the sthita prajna, the one who is firmly established in knowledge. Sri Krishna went on for a number of verses describe. Excuse me. So back in chapter 2, Sri Krishna went on for a number of verses describing the nature of an enlightened person. This is similar in nature. Context is quite different, but similar in nature, that he describes what is the nature of an enlightened person. Remember back in chapter 2, Arjuna says, does the enlightened person walk and talk like anyone else? Here we don't see, and which is silly, because enlightenment is not a matter of how you look or how you behave. Here, all of that stuff is left aside. Sri Krishna goes to the core of the issue, the core of the matter, which is, how does an enlightened person think? What is the nature of their mind? So here we get a peek, as it were, into the mind of an enlightened person, into the mind of one who is completely fulfilled. And it begins in verse 13 and continues to the end of the chapter. Anyway, we'll begin and then continue it in our next class. Adveshta sarva bhutanam, Adveshta sarva bhutanam, Maitra karuna hevacha, Maitra karuna hevacha, Nirmamo nirahankaraha, Nirmamo nirahankaraha, Samadukha sukhakshami, Samadukha sukhakshami. Okay. So, by the way, there's a series of 8 verses which are, if you know the Sanskrit, is just lovely, lovely poetry. Just the nature of these expressions. There's an innate beauty in these expressions in Sanskrit. I'll do my best to bring it out. But if you know the Sanskrit, there's something unique about this set of 8 verses. So describing the nature of the enlightened person as one who is adveshta, one who is free from hate. Sarva bhutanam, for all creatures. Free from hate for all creatures. To understand that a little bit better in this context, actually, in satsanga, just a couple of weeks ago, we had this long, interesting, important discussion about how the fact that hate is not a primary emotion, it's a secondary emotion. It's secondary because hate is almost always preceded by fear. Why do you hate something? If you hate being ill, why do you hate being ill? Because you fear being deprived of your life or being deprived of activities. Why do people hate other people? More significantly, other people are hated because they're feared. Fear is the seed from which hate evolves. We had a long discussion in that satsang. But to put it in context, freedom from hate, in the sense of one who is fulfilled, you don't immediately see the connection, but you can definitely get the connection that one who is fulfilled, one who is like the ocean, for whom you can't become more full, you can't become less full. If that is you, what would you fear? Think about that. If you experienced a contentment which was unshakable, that's a good way of putting it. Suppose you experienced in your life unshakable contentment. Every moment of every day, in every situation possible, you experienced unshakable contentment. In that condition, what would you fear? Nothing, right? Nothing could rob you of your contentment. You would fear nothing. Fearing nothing means, why would you fear people or events which would typically be considered harmful? Plenty of people and events can be considered harmful, like bad health. But why would you fear it if you knew your contentment was unshakable? There'd be no fear, therefore no hate. And in that satsang, let me just make one more point. It's really interesting. Here Sri Krishna uses the word free from hate, but most scriptures describe the enlightened person not as being free from hate. Especially the Upanishads, in several places, describe the enlightened person not as one who is free from hate, but one who is free from fear, for the reasons we've just described. But here, Sri Krishna says, free from hate. Why? Free from fear. Why free from fear? Absolutely full, unshakable contentment. Therefore, adveshta. Free from hate or fear for sarva bhutanam, for any being. Maitraha. Maitri is friendship. So maitraha, this person is a friend to anyone. Karunaha eva, and is compassionate. One who is friendly and compassionate to all. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, you have this idea of the enlightened person is aloof, sitting in meditation, sitting in the cave. Not exactly what Sri Krishna describes here. One who is friendly and compassionate is not describing one who's in a cave, but one who is engaged in worldly life. And further, by the way, if you're enlightened, do you need to remain in the cave to enjoy contentment? If you're enlightened, you will be fulfilled and have that unshakable contentment if you're inside the cave or if you're inside of some chaotic situation. What difference does it make? You'll be perfectly content if you're in the cave or if you're in the chaotic world. What difference does it make? This is enlightenment. And that enlightened person then, not confined to the cave, can be engaged in the world. Being engaged in the world, being maitraha, being friendly, and karunaha, being compassionate. Why, and again, why not aloof? And there's something in human nature where if there is, in the absence of fear, we have to say that, in the absence of fear, you share whatever you have. Normal, right? Like in a family, not a dysfunctional family, in a healthy family where everyone is happy and healthy. In that healthy family, you share whatever you have. No fear. And notice many people have a hard time sharing because they're fearful. Says, well, if I give this away, then I'll have less. Suppose you felt such fullness and completeness, you knew that no matter what you gave away, you would still enjoy the very same fullness and contentment. So there'd be no hesitation in giving to others, in sharing with others. In modern times, the most valuable commodity many of us have is time. We think our time is very short. Therefore, we're hesitant to share our time with others. An enlightened person won't have that sense at all. No fear of loss, therefore prepared to share their time, their resources, without any limitation whatsoever. Pujya Swami Tadatmananda called it being able to give recklessly. His word. He said, be a reckless giver, was his expression. Nice. Further, the enlightened person is nirmamaha and nirahankaraha, free from ahankara, literally ego, but in a more concrete way, the sense of being an agent of action. I did it. I am doing it. I am teaching. Am I teaching? Teaching is taking place, I hope. But I'm not teaching. I'm observing teaching being done by this body, mind, sense complex. Fortunately, with my guru's grace, this thing got well trained to teach, and I get to, figuratively speaking, I get to sit back and watch it teach as sakshi, as the awareful witness, as the unchanging consciousness that illumines all the changing activities in my mind. When you know I am that consciousness, then you are no longer an agent of activity, no longer a karta, a doer. And that's what's expressed here by nirahankaraha, free from doership, literally free from ego, but free from doership. And also nirmamaha, free from possessiveness. Possessiveness is related to another important Vedanta concept. Not only are you not a karta, an agent of action, you are also not a bhokta, an enjoyer of experience. Here's the point here. The body and mind, this body and mind has a relationship with the world, with all of you. This body and mind has a relationship with each of you. This one is teacher or friend, and here are students and friends. There's a relationship. So relationship like my friend, my student. Those are relationships. But my friend or my student is a reference to a relationship between this body and mind and that body and mind. That body and mind is my friend or my student. This body and mind is the one who's having that relationship, but I'm not this body and mind. I am that sakshi, that conscious observer, that unchanging conscious awareness, which is not engaged in all these activities. Therefore, nirahankaraha, I'm not an agent. The enlightened person is not an agent of action. Nirmamaha, literally free from possessiveness, but in a more profound, definitely free from possessiveness, but in a more profound sense. Free from relationships. You know that wherever there are relationships, there are problems, without exception. Wherever there's a relationship, there are problems, so free from the problems associated with the relationships. And for the same reason, the person is sama, dukkha, sukhaha. The person is sama, the same, has composure, whether things are going nicely, sukha, or whether things are going miserably, dukkha, unaffected by pleasure and pain. How can you be unaffected by pleasure and pain? For the same reason we just described. The awareful observer, consciousness, is utterly unaffected. Pleasure and pain take place in your mind. Pleasure and pain taking place in your mind are illumined by consciousness. That consciousness isn't affected by the pleasure and pain any more than the sun gets affected by what it shines on. If the sun shines on, I've given this example before, if the sun shines on a sacred Hindu temple, or if the sun shines on a pile of filth, is the sun made more holy when it shines on the sacred temple? Is the sun defiled in any way when it shines on the filth? The sun is utterly unaffected by whatever it shines upon, just as consciousness, the essence of who you are, utterly unaffected by whatever it reveals in your mind. And for the same reason, this person is kshami, patient. Patient meaning having no expectations, having no needs, or to use my guru's expression, having no agenda. That's that state, krita krityatha, that condition of having ticked off every last item on your lifelong to-do list. This sense of unshakable contentment, this sense of perfect, complete fulfillment. This is a condition of enlightenment. So Sri Krishna has just begun with this verse. This is actually a good place to conclude today. When we return in our next class, we'll pick up this verse quickly and then proceed. Hopefully, it would be nice to see all 8 verses in a sequence so you can appreciate the beauty of the poetry and the nice flow of the teaching. So hopefully we'll be able to then finish the chapter in our next class. Couple of announcements. Tomorrow we have satsang, question-answer time, 6 p.m. The weather is going to be quite nice, so please join us. We sit outside this time of year. It's really lovely. Come join us for satsang tomorrow at 6. And then I'm really, really happy to announce that we're finally resuming our Tuesday evening Vedanta class. It's one of our most important classes. It's been on hiatus now for, more than 2 years, right? So it's wonderful. And the difference between the Vedanta class, this is also Vedanta, but this is Vedanta more in the context of day-to-day life. That's what the Bhagavad Gita is known for. Vedanta in daily life, so to speak. And the Tuesday evening classes, Vedanta classes, are more focused Vedanta. It goes more deep, very honestly, it goes more deeply into all these teachings. So that Vedanta class will begin this coming Tuesday. The classes will be held at 7:30 in the evening, every Tuesday evening. And our topic this time, I've chosen Upadesha Sahasri, which is perhaps the most important text of Sri Shankaracharya. I'll have to explain why it's considered the most important text of Shankaracharya. I'll explain that and much more in our first class on Tuesday. So if you want to be more deeply engaged in in Vedantic inquiry, please join us on this coming Tuesday, and then every Tuesday evening at 7:30. Very good. We'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Hupamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashrinvan Utebhasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gurudhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyaptadehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Hamritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.